The Genius of Christianity, or the Spirit and Beauty of the Christian Religion, by François-Auguste René de Chateaubriand. Translation by Charles I. White, D.D. Ninth Revised Edition. Part the First. Dogmas and Tenets, Book 1. Mysteries and Sacraments, Chapter 1. Introduction. Ever since Christianity was first published to the world, it has been continually assailed by three kinds of enemies: heretics, sophists, and those apparently frivolous characters who destroy everything with the shafts of ridicule. Numerous apologists have given victorious answers to subtleties and falsehoods, but they have not been so successful against derision. Saint Ignatius of Antioch, Saint Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyons, Tertullian in his prescriptions, which Bossuet calls divine, combated the innovators of their time, whose extravagant expositions corrupted the simplicity of the faith. Calumny was first repulsed by Quadratus and Aristides, philosophers of Athens. We know, however, nothing of their apologies for Christianity, except a fragment of the former, which Eusebius has preserved. Both he and St. Jerome speak of the work of Aristides as a masterpiece of eloquence. The pagans accused the first Christians of atheism, incest, and certain abominable feasts, at which they were said to partake of the flesh of a newborn infant. After Quadratus and Aristides, St. Justin pleaded the cause of the Christians. His style is unadorned, and the circumstances attending his martyrdom prove that he shed his blood for religion with the same sincerity with which he had written in its defense. Athenagoras has shown more address in his apology, but he has neither the originality of Justin nor the impetuosity of the author of the Apologetic. Tertullian is the unrefined Bossuet of Africa. St. Theophilus, in his 3 books addressed to his friend Autolycus, displays imagination and learning, and the Octavius of Minucius Felix exhibits the pleasing picture of a Christian and 2 idolaters conversing on religion and the nature of God during a walk along the seashore. Arnobius the rhetorician, Lactantius, Eusebius, and St. Cyprian also defended Christianity, but their efforts were not so much directed to the display of its beauty as to the exposure of the absurdities of idolatry. Origen combated the sophists and seems to have had the advantage over Celsus, his antagonist, in learning argument and style. The Greek of Origen is remarkably smooth. It is, however, interspersed with Hebrew and other foreign idioms, which is frequently the case with writers who are masters of various languages. During the reign of Emperor Julian commenced a persecution, perhaps more dangerous than violence itself, which consisted in loading the Christians with disgrace and contempt. Julian began his hostility by plundering the churches. He then forbade the faithful to teach or to study the liberal arts and sciences. Sensible, however, of the important advantages of the institutions of Christianity, the emperor determined to establish hospitals and monasteries, and after the example of the gospel system, to combine morality with religion. He ordered a kind of sermons to be delivered in the pagan temples. The sophists, by whom Julian was surrounded, assailed the Christian religion with the utmost violence. The emperor himself did not disdain to combat those whom he styled contemptible Galileans. The work which he wrote has not reached us, but St. Cyril, Patriarch of Alexandria, quotes several passages of it in his refutation, which has been preserved. When Julian is serious, St. Cyril proves too strong for him, but when the emperor has recourse to irony, the Patriarch loses his advantage. Julian's style is witty and animated. Cyril is sometimes passionate, obscure, and confused. From the time of Julian to that of Luther, the Church, flourishing in full vigor, had no occasion for apologists. But when the Western Schism took place, with new enemies arose new defenders. It cannot be denied that at first the Protestants had the superiority, at least in regard to forms, as Montanescu has remarked. Erasmus himself was weak when opposed to Luther, and Theodore Beza had a captivating manner of writing, in which his opponents were too often deficient. When Bossuet at length entered the lists, the victory remained not long undecided. The hydra of heresy was once more overthrown. His Exposition de la Doctrine Catholique and Histoire des Variations are two masterpieces, which will descend to posterity. It is natural for schism to lead to infidelity, and for heresy to engender atheism. Bayle and Spinoza arose after Calvin, and they found in Clarke and Leibniz men of sufficient talents to refute their sophistry. Abadi wrote an apology for religion, remarkable for method and sound argument. Unfortunately, his style is feeble, though his ideas are not destitute of brilliancy. Quote, "If the ancient philosophers," observed Abadi, "adored the virtues, their worship was only a beautiful species of idolatry." End quote. While the Church was yet enjoying her triumph, Voltaire renewed the persecution of Julian. He possessed the baneful art of making infidelity fashionable among a capricious but amiable people. Every species of self-love was pressed into this insensate league. Religion was attacked with every kind of weapons, from the pamphlet to the folio, from the epigram to the sophism. No sooner did a religious book appear than the author was overwhelmed with ridicule, while works which Voltaire was the first to laugh at among his friends were extolled to the skies. Such was his superiority over his disciples that sometimes he could not forbear diverting himself with their irreligious enthusiasm. Meanwhile, the destructive system continued to spread throughout France. It was first adopted in those provincial academies, each of which was a focus of bad taste and faction. Women of fashion and grave philosophers alike read lectures on infidelity. It was at length concluded that Christianity was no better than a barbarous system, and that its fall could not happen too soon for the liberty of mankind, the promotion of knowledge, the improvement of the arts, and the general comfort of life. To say nothing of the abyss into which we were plunged by this aversion to the religion of the gospel, its immediate consequence was a return more affected than sincere to that mythology of Greece and Rome to which all wonders of antiquity were ascribed. People were not ashamed to regret that worship which had transformed mankind into a herd of madmen, monsters of indecency or ferocious beasts. This could not fail to inspire contempt for the writers of the age of Louis XIV, who, however, had reached the high perfection which distinguished them only by being religious. If no one ventured to oppose them face to face, on account of their firmly established reputation, they were nevertheless attacked in 1,000 indirect ways. It was asserted that they were unbelievers in their hearts, or at least that they would have been much greater characters had they lived in our times. Every author blessed his good fortune for having been born in the glorious age of the Diderots and d'Alemberts, in that age when all the attainments of the human mind were ranged in alphabetical order in the encyclopedia, that Babel of the sciences and of reason. Men distinguished for their intelligence and learning endeavored to check this torrent, but their resistance was vain. Their voice was lost in the clamors of the crowd, and their victory was unknown to the frivolous people who directed public opinion in France, and upon whom, for that reason, it was highly necessary to make an impression. Thus the fatality which had given a triumph to the sophists during the reign of Julian made them victorious in our times. The defenders of the Christians fell into an error which had before undone them. They did not perceive that the question was no longer to discuss this or that particular tenet, since the very foundation on which these tenets were built was rejected by their opponents. By starting from the mission of Jesus Christ and descending from one consequence to another, they established the truths of faith on a solid basis. But this mode of reasoning, which might have suited the 17th century extremely well, when the groundwork was not contested, proved of no use in our days. It was necessary to pursue a contrary method and to ascend from the effect to the cause, not to prove that the Christian religion is excellent because it comes from God, but that it comes from God because it is excellent. They likewise committed another error in attaching importance to the serious refutation of the sophists, a class of men whom it is utterly impossible to convince, because they are always in the wrong. They overlook the fact that these people are never in earnest in their pretended search after truth, that they esteem none but themselves, that they are not even attached to their own system, except for the sake of the noise which it makes, and are ever ready to forsake it on the first change of public opinion. For not having made this remark, much time and trouble were thrown away by those who undertook the vindication of Christianity. Their object should have been to reconcile to religion, not the sophists, but those whom they were leading astray. They had been seduced by being told that Christianity was the offspring of barbarism, an enemy of the arts and sciences, of reason and refinement, a religion whose only tendency was to encourage bloodshed, to enslave mankind, to diminish their happiness, and to retard the progress of the human understanding. It was therefore necessary to prove that, on the contrary, the Christian religion of all the religious that ever existed is the most humane, the most favorable to liberty and to the arts and sciences, that the modern world is indebted to it for every improvement from agriculture to the abstract sciences, from the hospitals for the reception of the unfortunate to the temples reared by Michelangelos and embellished by the Raphaels. It was necessary to prove that nothing is more divine than its morality, nothing more lovely and more sublime than its tenets, its doctrine and its worship. That it encourages genius, corrects the taste, develops the virtuous passions, imparts energy to the ideas, presents noble images to the writer, and perfect models to the artist. That there is no disgrace in being believers with Newton and Bossuet, with Pascal and Racine. In a word, it was necessary to summon all the charms of the imagination and all the interests of the heart to the assistance of that religion against which they had been set in array. The reader may now have a clear view of the object of our work. All other kinds of apologies are exhausted, and perhaps they would be useless at the present day. Who would now sit down to read a work professionally theological? Possibly a few sincere Christians who are already convinced. But it may be asked, may there not be some danger in considering religion in a merely human point of view? Why so? Does our religion shrink from the light? Surely one great proof of its divine origin is that it will bear the test of the fullest and severest scrutiny of reason. Would you have us always open to the reproach of enveloping our tenets in sacred obscurity, lest their falsehood should be detected? Will Christianity be the less true for appearing the more beautiful? Let us banish our weak apprehensions. Let us not, by an excess of religion, leave religion to perish. We no longer live in those times when you might say, "Believe without inquiring." People will inquire in spite of us, and our timid silence, in heightening the triumph of the infidel, will diminish the number of believers. It is time that the world should know what all those charges of absurdity, vulgarity, and meanness that are daily alleged against Christianity may be reduced. It is time to demonstrate that instead of debasing the ideas, it encourages the soul to take the most daring flights, and is capable of enchanting the imagination as divinely as the deities of Homer and Virgil. Our arguments will at least have this advantage, that they will be intelligible to the world at large, and will require nothing but common sense to determine their weight and strength. In works of this kind, authors neglect, perhaps rather too much, to speak the languages of their readers. It is necessary to be a scholar with a scholar, and a poet with a poet. The Almighty does not forbid us to tread the flowery path, if it serves to lead the wanderer once more to him. Nor is it always by the steep and rugged mountain that the lost sheep finds its way back to the fold. We think that this mode of considering Christianity displays associations of ideas which are but imperfectly known. Sublime in the antiquity of its recollections, which go back to the creation of the world, ineffable in its mysteries, adorable in its sacraments, interesting in its history, celestial in its morality, rich and attractive in its ceremonial, it is fraught with every species of beauty. Would you follow it in poetry? Tasso, Milton, Corneille, Racine, Voltaire will depict to you its miraculous effects. In the beautiful letters, and eloquence, history, and philosophy, what have not Bossuet, Fenelon, Massillon, Bourdelot, Bacon, Pascal, Euler, Newton, Leibniz produced by its divine inspiration? And the arts, what masterpieces! If you examine it in its worship, what ideas are suggested by its antique Gothic churches, its admirable prayers, its impressive ceremonies? Among its clergy, behold all those scholars who have handed down to you the languages and the works of Greece and Rome, all those anchorets of Thebes, all those asylums for the unfortunate, all those missionaries to China, to Canada, to Paraguay, not forgetting the military orders whence chivalry derived its origin. Everything has been engaged in our cause, the manners of our ancestors, the pictures of days of yore, poetry, even romances themselves. We have called smiles from the cradle and tears from the tomb. Sometimes with a Maronite monk we dwell on the summits of Carmel and Lebanon. At others we watch the daughter of charity at the bedside of the sick. Here 2 American lovers summon us into the recesses of their deserts. There we listen to the sighs of the Virgin in the solitude of the cloister. Homer takes his place by Milton and Virgil beside Tasso. The ruins of Athens and of Memphis form contrast with the ruins of Christian monuments and the tombs of Ossian with our rural churchyards. At St. Denis we visit the ashes of kings, and when our subject requires us to treat of the existence of God, we seek our proofs in the wonders of nature alone. In short, we endeavor to strike the heart of the infidel in every possible way, but we dare not flatter ourselves that we possess the miraculous rod of religion which caused living streams to burst forth from the flinty rock. 4 parts, each divided into 6 books, compose the whole of our work. The first treats of dogma and doctrine. The second and third comprehend the poetic of Christianity, or its connection with poetry, literature, and the arts. The fourth embraces its worship, that is to say, whatever relates to the ceremonies of the Church and to the clergy, both secular and regular. We have frequently compared the precepts, doctrines, and worship of other religions with those of Christianity, and to gratify all classes of readers, we have also occasionally touched upon the historical and mystical part of the subject. Having thus stated the general plan of the work, we shall now enter upon that portion of it which treats of dogma and doctrine, and as a preliminary step to the consideration of the Christian mysteries, we shall institute an inquiry into the nature of mysterious things in general. Chapter 2. Of the nature of the mysteries. There is nothing beautiful, pleasing, or grand in life, but that which is more or less mysterious. The most wonderful sentiments are those which produce impressions difficult to be explained. Modesty, chaste love, virtuous friendship are full of secrets. It would seem that half a word is sufficient for the mutual understanding of hearts that love and that they are, as it were, disclosed to each other's view. Is not the innocence also, which is nothing but a holy ignorance, the most ineffable of mysteries? If infancy is so happy, it is owing to the absence of knowledge. And if old age is so wretched, it is because it knows everything. But fortunately for the latter, when the mysteries of life are at an end, those of death commence. What we say here of the sentiments may be said also of the virtues. The most angelic are those which, emanating immediately from God, such as charity, studiously conceal themselves, like their source, from mortal view. If we pass to the qualities of the mind, we shall find that the pleasures of the understanding are in like manner secrets. Mystery is of a nature so divine that the early inhabitants of Asia conversed only by symbols. What science do we continually apply, if not that which always leaves something to be conjectured, and which sets before our eyes an unbounded prospect? If we wander in the desert, a kind of instinct impels us to avoid the plains, where we can embrace every object at a single glance. We repair to those forests, the cradle of religion, those forests whose shades, whose sounds, and whose silences are full of wonders, those solitudes where the first fathers of the church were fed by the raven and the bee, and where these holy men tasted such inexpressible delights as to exclaim, "Enough, O Lord! I will be overpowered if thou dost not moderate thy divine communications." We do not pause at the foot of a modern monument. But if in a desert island in the midst of the wide ocean we come all at once to a statue of bronze, whose extended arm points to the regions of the setting sun, and whose base, covered with hieroglyphics, attests the united ravages of the billows and of time, what a fertile source of meditation is here open to the traveler. There is nothing in the universe but what is hidden, but what is unknown. Is not man himself an inexplicable mystery? Whence proceeds that flash of lightning which we call existence? And in what night is it about to be extinguished? The Almighty has stationed birth and death under the form of veiled phantoms at the two extremities of our career. The one produces the incomprehensible moment of life, which the other uses every exertion to destroy. Considering, then, the natural propensity of man to the mysterious, it cannot appear surprising that the religions of all nations should have had their impenetrable secrets. The Celi studied the miraculous words of the doves of Dodona. India, Persia, Ethiopia, Scythia, the Gauls, the Scandinavians have their caverns, their holy mountains, their sacred oaks, where the Brahmins, the Magi, the Gymnosophists, or the Druids proclaim the inexplicable oracle of the gods. Heaven forbid that we should have any intention to compare these mysteries with those of the true religion, or the inscrutable decrees of the sovereign of the universe with the changing ambiguities of gods, quote, "the work of human hands," end quote. We merely wish to remark that there is no religion without mysteries. These, with sacrifices, constitute the essential part of worship. God himself is the great secret of nature. The divinity was represented veiled in Egypt, and the Sphinx was seated upon the threshold of the temples. Chapter 3. Of the Christian Mysteries. The Trinity. We perceive at the first glance that in regard to mysteries, the Christian religion has a great advantage over the religions of antiquity. The mysteries of the latter bore no relation to man, and afforded at the utmost but a subject of reflection to the philosopher or of song to the poet. Our mysteries, on the contrary, speak directly to the heart. They comprehend the secrets of our existence. The question here is not about a futile arrangement of numbers, but concerning the salvation and felicity of the human race. Is it possible for man, whom daily experience so fully convinces of his ignorance and frailty, to reject the mysteries of Jesus Christ? They are the mysteries of the unfortunate. The Trinity, which is the first mystery presented by the Christian faith, opens an immense field for philosophic study. Whether we consider it in the attributes of God or examine the vestiges of this dogma, which was formerly diffused throughout the East, it is a pitiful mode of reasoning to reject whatever we cannot comprehend. It would be easy to prove, beginning even with the utmost simple things in life, that we know absolutely nothing. Shall we, then, pretend to penetrate into the depths of divine wisdom? The Trinity was probably known to the Egyptians. The Greek inscription on the great obelisk in the Circus Major at Rome was to this effect: "The mighty God, the begotten of God, the all-resplendent Apollo the Spirit." Heraclides of Pontus and Porphyry recorded a celebrated oracle of Serapis: "In the beginning was God, then the Word and the Spirit, all three produced together and uniting in one." The Magi had a sort of trinity in their Metris, or Amasis, and Ariminus, or Mitra, or Amasis, and Arimene. Plato seems to allude to this incomprehensible dogma in several of his works. "Not only is it alleged," says Dacier, "that he had a knowledge of the Word, the eternal Son of God, but it is also asserted that he was acquainted with the Holy Ghost, and thus had some idea of the most Holy Trinity." For he writes to the younger Dionysius, "I must give Archidemus an explanation respecting what is infinitely more important and more divine, and what you are extremely anxious to know, since you have sent him to me for the express purpose. For, from what he has told me, you are of the opinion that I have not sufficiently explained what I think of the nature of the first principle. I am obliged to write to you in enigmas, that if my letter should be intercepted, either by land or sea, those who read may not be able to understand it. All things are around their king. They exist for him, and he alone is the cause of good things. Second, for such as are second, and third, for those that are third." In the Eponymus and elsewhere he lays down as principles the first good, the word or the understanding, and the soul. The first good is God. The word or the understanding is the Son of the first good, by whom he was begotten like to himself. And the soul, which is the middle term between the Father and the Son, is the Holy Ghost. Plato had borrowed this doctrine of the Trinity from Timaeus the Locrian, who had received it from the Italian school. Marsilius Ficinus, in one of his remarks on Plato, shows after Jamblichus, Porphyry, Plato, and Maximus of Tyre that the Pythagoreans were acquainted with the excellence of the number 3. Pythagoras intimates it in these words: "Honor chiefly the habit, the judgment seat, and the triobolus, 3 oboli." The doctrine of the Trinity is known in the East Indies and in Tibet. "On this subject," says Father Calumet, "the most remarkable and surprising thing that I have met with is a passage in one of their books entitled Lama Ostambam. It begins thus: 'The Lord, the good, the great God in his mouth is the Word.' The term which they employ personifies the Word. It then treats of the Holy Ghost under the appellation of the Wind, or Perfect Spirit, and concludes with the creation which it attributes to one single God. What I have learned," observes the same missionary in another place, "respecting the religion of Tibet is as follows. They call God Conciosa, and seem to have some idea of the adorable Trinity, for sometimes they term him Concioxosic, the one God, and at others Concioxum, which is equivalent to the triune God. They make use of a kind of chaplet over which they pronounce the words Om, Ha, Hum. When you ask what these mean, they reply the first signifies intelligence or arm, that is to say power, that the second is the word, that the third is the heart or love, and that these 3 words together signify God. The English missionaries to Tahiti have found some notion of the Trinity among the natives of that island. Nature herself seems to furnish a kind of physical proof of the Trinity, which is the archetype of the universe, or, if you wish, its divine framework. May not the external and material world bear some impress of that invisible and spiritual ark which sustains it, according to Plato's idea, who represented corporeal things as the shadows of the thoughts of God? The number 3 is the term by excellence in nature. It is not a product itself, but it produces all other fractions, which led Pythagoras to call it the motherless number. Some obscure tradition of the Trinity may be discovered even in the fables of polytheism. The Graces took it for their number. It existed in Tartarus, both for the life and the death of man, and for the infliction of celestial vengeance. Finally, three brother gods possessed among them the complete dominion of the universe. The philosophers divided the moral man into three parts, and the fathers imagined that they discovered the image of the spiritual trinity in the human soul. If we impose silence on our senses, says the great Bossuet, and retire for a short time into the recesses of our soul, that is to say, into that part where the voice of truth is heard, we shall there perceive a sort of image of the Trinity whom we adore. Thought, which we feel produced as the offspring of our mind, as the son of our understanding, gives us some idea of the Son of God, conceived from all eternity in the intelligence of the celestial Father. For this reason, this Son of God assumes the name of the Word, to intimate that he is produced in the bosom of the Father, not as bodies are generated, but as the inward voice that is heard within our souls, there arises when we contemplate truth. But the fecundity of the mind does not stop at this inward voice, this intellectual thought, this image of the truth that is formed within us. We love both this inward voice and the intelligence which gives it birth, and while we love them, we feel within us something which is not less precious to us than intelligence and thought, which is the fruit of both, which unites them and unites with them, and forms with them but one and the same existence. Thus, as far as there can be any resemblance between God and man, is produced in God the eternal love which springs from the Father, who thinks, and from the Son, who is his thought, to constitute with him and his thought one and the same nature, equally happy and equally perfect. What a beautiful commentary is this on that passage of Genesis, "Let us make man." Tertullian, in his Apology, thus expresses himself on this great mystery of our religion. God created the world by his word, his reason, and his power. You philosophers admit that the Logos, the word and reason, is the creator of the universe. The Christians merely add that the proper substance of the word and reason, that substance by which God produced all things, is spirit, that this word must have been pronounced by God, that, having been pronounced, it was generated by him, that consequently it is the Son of God, and God by reason of the unity of substance. If the sun shoots forth a ray, its substance is not separated, but extended. Thus the Word is spirit of spirit, and God of God, like a light kindled at another light. Thus, whatever proceeds from God is God, and the two with their spirit form but one, differing in properties, not in number, in order, not in nature. The Son having sprung from his principle without being separated from it. Now this ray of the divinity descended into the womb of a virgin, invested itself with flesh, and became man united with God. This flesh, supported by the Spirit, was nourished. It grew, spoke, taught, acted. It was Christ. This proof of the Trinity may be comprehended by persons of the simplest capacity. It must be recollected that Tertullian was addressing men who persecuted Christ, and whom nothing would have been more highly gratified than the means of attacking the doctrine, and even the persons of his defenders. We shall pursue these proofs no farther, but leave them to those who have studied the principles of the Italy set of philosophers, and the higher department of Christian theology. As to the images that bring under our feeble senses the most sublime mystery of religion, it is difficult to conceive how the awful triangular fire, resting on a cloud, is unbecoming the dignity of poetry. Is Christianity less impressive than the heathen mythology when it represents to us the Father under the form of an old man, the majestic ancestor of ages, or as a brilliant effusion of light? Is there not something wonderful in the contemplation of the Holy Spirit, the sublime Spirit of Jehovah under the emblem of gentleness, love, and innocence? Doth God decree the propagation of his word? The Spirit then ceases to be that dove which overshadowed mankind, the wings of peace. He becomes a visible word, a tongue of fire, which speaks all the languages of the earth, and whose eloquence creates or overthrows empires. To delineate the divine Son, we need only borrow the words of the Apostle who beheld him in his glorified state. He was seated on a throne, says St. John in the Apocalypse. His face shone like the sun in his strength, and his feet like fine brass melted in a furnace. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and out of his mouth went a sharp two-edged sword. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and in his left a book sealed with the 7 seals. His voice was as the sound of many waters. The 7 spirits of God burned before him like 7 lamps, and he went forth from his throne attended by lightnings, and voices and thunders. This is the end of chapters 1 through 3 of Part 1, Book 1 of The Genius of Christianity by Chateaubriand. Thank you for listening.